Hello everyone. Today in this video, I would like to talk about the history of Portuguese exploration in the Indian Ocean between the period 1483 and 1515. It tells how the Portuguese learned the rhythm of Atlantic winds, becoming the spice kings of the East. They were the first Europeans to build a maritime empire in the Indian Ocean. For this, I have referred the book Conquerors How Portugal Seized the Indian Ocean and Forged the First Global Empire, written by Roger Crowley, one of the best narrative historians. The Portuguese Civil War entered on 1385. In the beginning of 15th century, the Portuguese kings were too poor to mint their own gold coins. In 1415, a Portuguese fleet sailed across the Straits of Gibraltar and stormed the Muslim port of Ceuta in Morocco, and that marked the beginning of Portuguese expansion. During that time, the Portuguese had no role in the Mediterranean trade. They were enviously looking at the wealth of Geneva and Venice, who were famous for silk, spice, and pearls trade. All the trade was through the Islamic cities of Alexandria and Damascus at monopoly prices, but the Portuguese were facing the Indian Ocean instead. The geography was their main challenge. During that time, Europeans and Arabs had little knowledge beyond Gibraltar to South Africa. Remember, North America was not even invented at that time. The fate of Portuguese completely facing the sea from the trade center became their fortune too. They learned the art of sea navigation and the secrets of Atlantic winds, and that gave them strength and confidence to make voyages down the coast of Africa to reach India. Remember, they touched India in 1498, Brazil in 1500, China in 1514, and Japan in 1543. In the aftermath of Ceuta, the Portuguese began to explore down the coast of Africa in search of slaves, gold, and spices. There was another visual theory that led the Portuguese. They believed the existence of a Christian king named Prince John somewhere in Africa or in Asia. In the beginning of 15th century, Portuguese believed that he was the king of Ethiopia and his kingdom was reachable through the heart of Africa. The Portuguese were thinking of an alliance with Prince John against the Islamic kings. However, they could not make their way through the rivers of Africa. At the same time, Christopher Columbus also made his attempts, but in the opposite direction towards the west, thinking that it would be a shorter route to India without even knowing America does exist. The Portuguese was trying to find a sea route around Africa. They made many unsuccessful attempts. However, each time they added new information about the unknown world in their map and erected iron pillars in those places. In the journey, many of them perished because of the attack from local people, shipwreck, and due to malaria. Due to consistent failures, the Portuguese king sent 2 monks across the Mediterranean to seek information about Prince John, but they came back due to their inability to speak Arabic. In October 1486, King John II appointed Bartholomew Dias as the head of expedition to find a trade route to India. At the same time, he sent an overland expedition too. They were Perodo Covilla and Afonso de Paiva. They both knew Arabic. In the sea, Dias passed all the preceding pillars and sailed further. At about 29 degrees south, near the coast of Africa, his ships were struggling with adverse winds and currents. Dias made a decision to turn his ship towards the west, away from the African coast. He took his ship out in a wider loop into the central Atlantic, where he picked the westerly winds. Whatever may be the logic behind, it was a great decisive moment in the history. After around 13 days, he turned his ships back to the east with the hope of hitting African coast. After 4 weeks, his ships reached the southern tip of Africa, parting Cape of Good Hope and Cape of Agulhas. They sailed miles farther. However, the crew was exhausted and the Dice decided to go back with pain. While turning his trip back home, Dice caught the sight of Cape of Good Hope for the first time. He named it as Cape of Storms. Later, the King John changed it to Cape of Good Hope as it promised the discovery of India. In meantime, Kovila and Paiva were stuck in Alexandria due to fever. However, they had recovered and went to Cairo and then to Athens. The two men parted at that point. Kovila went to India and Paiva to Ethiopia. Kovila got a trading ship across the Indian Ocean to Calicut, the hub of spice trade in the Malabar coast of India. Later, he reached Goa and then sailed to Ormuz at the mouth of Persian Gulf. He also navigated to Africa, trying to find the feasibility of rounding Africa. He collected all the information about the sailing routes. When he reached Cairo, he learned that Paiva had died on his way to Ethiopia. Back in Lisbon, the king was waiting for the news from Dice and Kovila. He sent two Jews to look for lost spies in the Mediterranean. They somehow found Kovila in Cairo. Kovila gave all the details he had and went to Ethiopia. He remained in Ethiopia until the day he died. The information from Dice and Kovila joined many dots. The next voyage happened after a pause of 80 years. At that time, the king was Manuel I. The voyage was under the command of Vasco da Gama. Initially, the king requested Gama's elder brother, Paulo, to take command. However, due to his ill health, he agreed to go under the command of Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama sailed from Lisbon on July 8, 1497 with a fleet of 4 vessels. During his voyage, he paid high price for not having cleanly rounded Cape of Good Hope. He made several attempts to battle around Cape of Good Hope in stormy weather. By December 1497, his fleet passed the last pillar erected by Bartholomew Dias. Then his ships passed the Mozambique Channel, the wide strait between Africa and the island of Madagascar, and finally reached the town of Mozambique. Then they moved farther north and reached Mombasa and Malindi in Kenya. In the whole journey, sometimes they had a fight with local people and sometimes they got a warm welcome. They also attacked small boats and ships came across for food, water, and sometimes for taking hostages for guidance. The Sultan of Malindi sent a Gujarati Muslim who was willing to be a pilot along with Gama. He possessed a chart of the western Indian coast. In fact, he was the person who led Europeans to India, whom the Arabs called as Ferankis. With a vague sense of destination, they went blindly into the Indian Ocean, away from the African coast, heading northeast. Finally, they survived India for the first time. On the day of May 20, 1498, Gama reached Calicut in the Malabar coast of India. They sailed around 12,000 miles in 309 days, losing many men. Once they reached Calicut, boats came to see strange visitors without knowing what that day meant to history. Though Calicut lacked a good natural harbor, it was established as a premier center for trading spices along the Malabar coast. Samarin was the ruler of Calicut, who lived along with high-caste Hindus. Gama received the permission to meet Samarin. The gifts given to Samarin were cheap and he flatly rejected them. Gama said he was an ambassador and not a merchant. If his king let him return again, he would bring him richer presents. Though Samarin ignored him, after a few days Gama was given permission to sell his merchandise in Calicut. During his stay in Calicut, Gama learned that Calicut is a major producer of ginger, pepper, and cinnamon. He also learned about the spice trade from Ceylon, the present-day Sri Lanka, and Malacca in Malaysia. Also, he knew about the traffic to Red Sea and then to Cairo and Alexandria, from where galleys of Geneva and Venice were loaded. July and August were dead months for the trade in Calicut, as it is too early for monsoon winds to carry ships from Arabia. By August, Gama was ready to go back. He wanted to leave some men behind to carry on the trade. He sent a messenger to Samarin with some more gifts, and in return he demanded for some spices. Zamarin did not accept the gifts again and detained his messenger along with the merchandise. He demanded to pay tax before leaving. Vasco da Gama also detained some of the merchants in Calicut and demanded for the return of his men and merchandise. Gama also threatened to bombard the city of Calicut. Samarin finally returned Gama's messenger. However, Gama returned only half the hostages he had. He agreed to return the rest once he gets his merchandise back. Later, Vasco da Gama changed his mind and decided to abandon his goods and leave with the hostages. Samarin was very furious and had a fight with Gama. However, he could not stop him. After a few days, Portuguese landed in Anjadeva, an island near Goa. While in Anjadeva, Portuguese received a visitor who spoke the Venetian dialect. He claimed to be a Muslim converted from Christian. He addressed Gama as a friend. Though initially he was found credible, later his behavior was seen to be mysterious. He was questioned and beaten. Then he admitted that a number of ships is going to attack Portuguese. As it was the time for Arabian trade in ships to arrive and Anjadeva being a stopover for water, Gama decided to leave. He also carried the Venetian. Later he confessed that he was a spy of Goa Sultan. Being unaware of the rhythm of monsoon, they were locked in the Indian Ocean for 3 months. Many people died of scurvy, thirst, and hunger. Finally, when they reached Malindi in the African coast, many of them were dead. Later they made to Lisbon. After the epic voyage, Gama lost 2/3 of his men, that included his brother. 6 months after Gama's return, another voyage was planned under the command of Alvarez Cabral, a larger fleet with 13 ships. He reached Anjadeva Island first and then he went to Calicut. His intention was to establish a friendly relation with Samarin. The old Samarin had died and it was his nephew who ruled the kingdom. But the Arab merchants were impelling his effort and finally he had a close fight with Samarin's men. After bombarding the city of Calicut, Cabral sailed to the city of Cochin. The Raja of Cochin was a vassal of Samarin. Cabral was allowed to load spices and permitted to establish a small, permanent trading post in Cochin. He also got invite for alliance from Kannanur and Koilan ports in Kerala against Samarin. After Cabral's expedition, the King Manuel realized that there were only a few Christians in the Malabar coast. In 1502, the King Manuel prepared a larger fleet to Indies. There were 20 ships in 2 squadrons under the command of Vasco da Gama. Gama was given the title of Admiral of the Indies. Gama's fleet did not face much challenges in crossing the Indian Ocean that time. The whole fleet arrived at Anjadeva on August 1502. Arrogant Gama raided nearby ports and declared King Manuel as the Lord of the Sea. After a few weeks, he sailed for the south. He stopped at Mount Delhi, north of Kannanur, a prominent headland backed by lagoons. On 24th September, Gama sighted a ship coming from the north. The ship was named Murray. It was returning from Red Sea with many men, women, and children. Many of them had been on pilgrimage to Mecca, and some of them were rich merchants from Calicut. Ship was armed and carried some cannons. Gama captured the ship. The merchants were ready to give him all they had. Gama took everything they had and the ship was stripped of her rudder and tackle. Then Gama laid gunpowder and ignited the ship. But the passengers of Murray could extinguish the fire somehow, and they began to defend with water, arms, missiles, and stones they had. For around 5 days, the ship was floating on the sea. On the 5th day, one of the Gama's ship came near her and fired a cannon from point blank. The fire could blast a hole in ship's deck. But there was an event of surprise to the Portuguese. There happened a close fight. Murray's men were firing missiles to the deck and the Portuguese were unable to make further fire. Seeing the danger, other Portuguese ships came near her and the spirit of defense of Murray failed. For another few days, Gama tracked his prey and finally burned the ship and all who were on it, with cold-blooded cruelty and without any pity. Gama then went to Cannanore and then to Calicut. Samarin was afraid, knowing the fear of Mary. He sent a letter to Gama for negotiation, and at the same time he sent letters to his vassals also, planning to expel Gama from the Indian Ocean. Gama came to know about those letters from the Raja of Cochin. Samarin's duplicity made him very angry, and it resulted in a fierce fight, bombarding the beach city of Calicut. After visiting his loyal companion, the Raja of Cochin, Gama went back to Lisbon. But he left his uncle, Vincent Story, to patrol the Malabar coast. Portuguese introduced a toll system for ships along the Malabar coast. They issued safe conduct passes called cuirasses. With the coming of Europeans, the Indian Ocean was no longer a free trade zone. Vincent Sodre was asked to protect the trading posts and also to blockade the Red Sea and the Muslim ships traveling to and from Calicut. He was more interested in the latter task, which promised him a rich plunder. Sodre ignored the plea of Raja of Cochin and decided to sail north to line his pockets. With his departure, Zamarin planned to attack Raja of Cochin and send him a threatening letter for siding Portuguese. But the Raja of Cochin unmoved. However, Zamarin failed to move to Cochin as the monsoon weather was pretty bad. He swore to return soon. Meanwhile, Sodre's ships wrecked and he drowned. However, the Raja of Cochin's faith was rewarded soon by the arrival of 2 ships from Lisbon under the command of Francisco de Albuquerque. A fortnight later came another 4 ships under the command of Afonso de Albuquerque, the most talented commander Portugal had ever seen. The King Manuel had given neither of the Albuquerques full authority. Manuel's plan was to simply buy spices and return. But in Malabar, the situation was worse. Even the trading posts were under threat. So they decided to build a fort in wood in the city of Cochin. The fort was named as Manuel Fort, the first European fort in India. Both Albuquerques left for Lisbon in a few days' gap, and they left a tiny force to guard the fort and the kingdom of Cochin under the command of Duarte Pacheco Pereira. In the return journey, Francisco's ships were swallowed in the Southern Ocean. As both Albuquerques departed, Zamarin advanced towards Cochin with a vast army. But Pereira's strategy earned a victory over him even with his small army. He knew that access to Cochin from outside was dependent on crossing a few forts according to tides. He applied his scientific knowledge about the relation between lunar phases and tides. He could foresee when Samarin's men would be possible. Portuguese planned an attack on the narrow forts with gunpowder. Samarin finally withdrew his army with a massive loss of prestige. He abdicated the throne and his nephew succeeded him. The Portuguese became more and more powerful, and the Calicut lost many of its vassals. Many Arabs went away from Calicut. The city lost its business importance and depopulated. The great days of Calicut were lost. In 1505, Francisco de Almeida was chosen for voyage. He was the first member of high nobility to lead an expedition. He was also granted the title of Viceroy and was the first Portuguese Viceroy to India. Viceroy had executive powers to act in King's Palace. After sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, Almeida fell upon the Swahili coast of Eastern Africa. His first objective was the island of Kelva in the present-day Tanzania. He dethroned the Sultan of Kelva for not paying tribute to him. He bombarded the city and planted a Portuguese flag on the beach. Also, he built the first stone fort in the Indian Ocean there in just 2 weeks' time. Before leaving, Almeida installed a puppet ruler who was a rival of the Sultan. His greed did not stop. He attacked another island, Mombasa in Kenya, and set the whole city on fire. The city of Mombasa was a powerful center of Arab trade at that time. Meanwhile, the Sultan of Cairo was preparing an army for defending Portuguese in the Indian In 1505, his army marched to Red Sea port under the command of Hussein Mushrif Ekod, and they started the voyage down the straits to Jeddah. Almeida continued his journey and soon landed on the island of Inchadaiva. He began to construct a fort there. During his stay, he had a dispute with the Raja of Honavar on Horse Strait. That led to a short fight and part of the city was destroyed and a number of ships were burnt belonging to a pirate, Timoji. That attack was led by Almeida's son, Lorenzo. By November 1505, Almeida reached Cochin. While Almeida was working hard to stabilize a profitable trade empire, King Manuel was thinking to change the command structure. Manuel appointed Afonso de Albuquerque as the governor to take charge from Almeida, but his appointment was kept a secret. Spice fleet was prepared under the command of Tostava da Canha. The whole fleet was intended to enter into Indian Ocean and establish a base camp on Socotra, an island near the Gulf of Aden, as a base camp for stamping Islamic traffic towards Egypt and Middle East. The fleet was hit by storms and delayed further by Canha's desire to explore Madagascar and plundering the Somalia coast. Instead of 6 months, it took 16 months to accomplish the task. Thus, Portuguese missed 1506 sailing season to the coast of India. Meanwhile, Mahmud's naval expedition under the command of Mushrif was at slow pace. After fortification of Jeddah, they reached port of Aden by 1507. Meanwhile, in Malabar coast, Portuguese continued to damage Muslim fleets. Almeida sent his son to cut off the increased traffic to Maldives. However, he missed the way and made first landing in Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka. Year 1506 was not promising to Portuguese, as a series of blows hit the Portuguese confidence and credibility. Due to the attack from Portuguese renegades and threats from Sultan of Bijapur, the fort of Enchadeva was found to be unsustainable. Almeida had to take a decision to abandon the fort. In order to fulfill the duty of issuing safe conduct passes, the son of Almeida with his ships went towards Chalpot. On the way, he anchored near Dabul when some of the Muslim merchants pleaded for help. They were the natives of Portuguese-friendly ports. Their ships were in Dabul and were threatened by a large fleet of ships from Mecca. Though Lorenzo decided to protect them, most of his captains disagreed, thinking that it would be an ambush. The impact of the decision was huge. All the merchants and their crew were killed. For the first time, Portuguese failed to protect their allies. Another incident that defined Portuguese was failure of their fleet to arrive. Merchants in Cochin and Cananore could not sell their spices. Cananore was particularly affected. Merchants also feared that their valuable horse trade with Persian Gulf would also be affected. At that time, there was another raging incident happened. A Portuguese captain killed a nephew of a famous merchant, accusing him of not having a valid conduct pass, even though he had one. All those incidents finally led to a wide-ranging Malabar revolt against Portuguese. Meanwhile, at Socotra, Cunha and Albuquerque went in separate ways. Cunha went to India. He was already an year late. Albuquerque took his ships to the barren shores of present-day Oman. Some of the ports of Omani coast were submitted to him without any defense, and some were captured. Later, Albuquerque returned to Hormuz. That was the axis of trade between Persia and Indian Ocean. The king of Hormuz offered him gifts, but Albuquerque refused it. His reply was, "Become the vassal of Portuguese crown." Initially, the king underestimated him, but the power of Portuguese cannon made the king accept Albuquerque's demand. He agreed to pay a hefty annual tribute. Albuquerque started building a fort there. As the time passed, the relation with the officials of the king went bad. Albuquerque bombarded the city of Hormuz. However, none of the captains had agreed to him. Four of the captains left him and set their sail to Cochin. Albuquerque was left with only two ships, so he sailed back to Socotra. After the dispatch of annual spice fleet, end of the year 1507, Almeida's son Lorenzo was given convoy duties. On February 1508, his fleet reached the port of Shaw. The expectation was Albuquerque would also join. During his stay at Shaw, Lorenzo heard rumors that an Egyptian fleet was on its way for a holy war with Portuguese, and it had docked on the port of Diu, 200 miles away. But he did not pay attention to those rumors. In fact, the Egyptian fleet under the command of Hussein Nosrif had reached Diu 6 months earlier. At Diu, Hussein received a courteous reception from the governor of Diu, Malik Ayas. Egyptians also had spies at Shaw. They were informed about the Portuguese presence, and they knew that Portuguese forces were very less. At Shaw, the Portuguese were in a vacation mode, spending their time on the banks of river Kuntalica. On one Friday, Portuguese sighted incoming ships. They thought it was Albuquerque. As the ships came closer, they realized the threat. There was a panic among the Portuguese. They were hurrying to prepare for defense. Very soon, Arab cannons began to blow, pouring iron balls on the Portuguese ships. For the first time, the Portuguese were on the receiving end. Fight continued for a few days. On the attempt to defend, Lorenzo was hit by a cannon fire and he died. The Portuguese had to leave from Shaw. Malik Ayas took with him many Portuguese prisoners, but he treated them well, as he was well aware of the consequences of the battle they had won. Almeida was very unhappy with Albuquerque on the fact that his primary task was to guard the mouth of Red Sea. Failure to do so ended up in the loss of his son and half the Portuguese supremacy. Albuquerque was very furious on his captains too, who abandoned him and left with him no choice other than to leave for Socotra. The Ormuz event wounded him also. He pledged not to trim his beard until the city was taken back. The King Manuel lost confidence in Almeida. Almeida was deeply hurt by the frostness of King's letter. He also learned that Albuquerque would be replacing him end of the year 1508. But the revenge for his son was brewing. Nothing could stop him. By December, he gathered a fleet of 18 ships and 1,200 men. By this time, Albuquerque also raised question, claiming his governorship. But Almeida denied, saying that his term of office would end only in January. Though Almeida offered him to join the expedition, he declined and decided to stay in Cochin. The following day, Almeida left, aiming to hunt the Egyptian fleet. End of the year, Almeida reached Dabul, which Lorenzo had failed to attack 2 years earlier. On December 31st, Almeida bombarded the city heavily, and then followed the Black Day of European conquest. Almost no one in the city was left alive. Ships from the ports were burned and the city was completely plundered. Almeida departed for Diu on January 5th, with a growing vengeance towards the Mamluks. Almeida received a letter from Ayas seeking for peace and agreed to hand over the prisoners who were taken at Shaw. Almeida's reply was polite but fearsome. He demanded to hand over all the Egyptians in the city. At Diu, Muslims were preparing for war. Hussein compelled Ayas also to join. Ayas was sure about the outcome of the war. He was planning to make a show of battle with minimum involvement. In the first week of February, Almeida's fleet landed in Diu. Then happened was inevitable, fierce fight between the Portuguese and the Muslims. Muslims fought bravely, but the Portuguese skills were superior and hence the outcome of the war was in favor of them. Hussein ran away in a small boat. The next day, Ayas sent a white flag and returned all the Portuguese captives. All the Egyptians in the city were surrendered to Portuguese. Their feet and hands were chopped off and some were burned alive. And some of them were tied onto the mouth of cannons and blasted into pieces. And some were tied in the Egyptian ships and then the ship were sank. After pouring his immense wrath on the Muslims, Almeida went back to Cochin. At Cochin, Albuquerque was waiting to take charge, but Almeida asked him to leave Cochin and refused to give him the charge. Albuquerque left to Cananore in a worm-eaten ship. He thought that Almeida was trying to kill him. The situation was only resolved when that year's spice fleet raised Cananore under the command of Marshal of Portugal, Dom Fernando Coutinho. He came with full royal authority. He carried Albuquerque with him to Cochin and demanded the handover. Albuquerque finally became the governor of India. The next day, Almeida departed from India forever. On the way, Almeida died along with his crew in an African island on a pointless fight with local people. Though Almeida had left, still Albuquerque was not free to fulfill his duties as a governor, as Coutinho was the highest ranking officer. His decision was to attack Zamarin. However, Albuquerque was against it. When they reached Calicut, Zamarin was not in his palace as he was involved. As Zamarin was expecting an attack any time, he had appointed a regent. In the beach, Zamarin had a decorated pavilion called Seraim. It was made of richly carved wood and had heavily decorated doors. That exotic object of desire was much talked even in Portugal. The marshal wanted to take the doors to Portugal as a trophy of the heroic deed. Before dawn, Albuquerque and his men landed close to the Seraim and lined in a good order. Albuquerque was supposed to wait for the marshal to proceed further. But by the lure of plunder, his men broke the discipline. Seeing the Portuguese army, Zamarin's men rushed out of the houses near the Seraim and had a fierce fight. By the time the marshal arrived, the doors were already seized. Seeing that, he was very angry. He himself wanted to seize the doors. In anger, he ordered his men to throw the doors into the sea. In the rage, Marshal decided to march to Zamarin's palace and grab the doors from the palace for honor. Albuquerque warned him, pointing that King's palace is 3 miles away and passages were narrow. But the marshal refused to hear him, and Albuquerque was asked to stay on the beach. After a fierce fight, Marshal and his men poured into King's palace. They looted everything they could. Since plundering yields personal benefits, everybody was busy. Meanwhile, Zamarin's men hit back. Anticipating the danger, Albuquerque had also came with his men to help the marshal. But it was not enough. Many Portuguese men died, including the marshal. Rest of them ran into the ships along with Albuquerque.